In other news, following weeks of international pressures, Israel has confirmed its decision to deliver at least 5,000 doses of the pfizer-biontech coronavirus vaccine to the Palestinian Authority. And Defense Minister Benny Gantz's office is explaining that the transfer will be primarily used to immunize the PA's frontline medical workers as they wait for the Russian-made sputnik-v vaccine to arrive in Ramallah. But here to discuss Israel's sudden change of heart is author and award-winning columnist for J-Post and Quds newspaper, Gershon Baskin. Gershon, thank you so much for being with us. Now, what is Israel's responsibility to the Palestinian Authority with respect to vaccines, legally speaking?
There is an argument on what the legal responsibilities are because under the Oslo agreements, which are largely violated by both sides, responsibilities for health were given to the Palestinian Authority, which was created under Oslo. Yet, according to international law, the territories governed through the Oslo agreements are still under Israeli control, meaning that under international law, Israel bears responsibility and is the legal sovereign as an occupied territory under the Geneva Convention. So, as I said, this is argued. I think we have to move away from the legal argument and talk about what is the benefit for Israel to, in fact, provide vaccinations for Palestinians, first the frontline workers in Palestine, the health officials, and then there's some 150,000 Palestinians who enter Israel almost every day to work in Israel. Shouldn't we be vaccinating them in order to protect not only them, but our own population?
Well, so I think that those are actually excellent questions, and I guess that really brings me to my next question is, why the sudden change of heart and where did it come from? Did it come from external forces putting pressure on Israeli authorities, or did this come from voices within the government who said similarly to what you just said, that it's in Israel's best interest ultimately to do this?
I think it's coming from both sources. Let's recognize that a large number of frontline workers in Israel, doctors and nurses and health officials within Israel are Palestinian citizens of Israel. And they are in the hospitals and in the clinics every day, giving the vaccinations, taking risks in treating COVID-19 patients in Israel. And I'm sure that their voices were heard. Also from within the army, the coordinator's office for the territories, there were people who were saying that this is something that Israel needs to do. And of course, I think from international signals coming primarily out of Washington, out of the new Biden administration, are probably telling Israel that we need to change the reality on the ground. There have been no negotiations for years, a lot of growing animosity and questions about the viability of any renewed peace process, and any steps that Israel takes that would help the Palestinian population would be steps that could improve the general environment between the two parties and hopefully lead to a renewed peace process at some time in the future.
Again, though, this brings me back to the idea of, where this came from, where this decision originated from, and whether and how that is going to play out in the optics. Because, the timeline of this is such that originally the Palestinian Authority had no intention of coming to Israel and asking Israel for anything. There are quotes from Palestinian officials saying that we don't want anything from Israel. We're not an arm of the IDF. Then international pressure started climbing on Israel, saying that Israel was due to do it. Then the Palestinian Authority jumped on that same bandwagon, saying, yeah, it's Israel's responsibility, and now Israel is passing these 5,000 doses. So is that going to be seen in the international community as an appeasement of sorts, and will that in turn maybe lead to more pressure?
I really don't know, and I really don't think it's that much of an important question. I think that the most important thing is that people get vaccinated. There is no a border for the virus between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, whether it be the West Bank or Gaza. This virus travels across that border, and it doesn't really matter who's making the decision, just as long as people are getting vaccinated. And people are people, whether they're Israelis or Palestinians, Jews, Christians, or Muslims. That's the most important thing that we should be looking at here. Israel is very much an island, and the Palestinians are part of that island. And we have an interest in seeing that everyone between the river and the sea gets vaccinated. That's the main thing of importance.
All right, well, I'd love to see how this is going to be played out. Of course, we don't know exactly when these vaccines are going to be delivered and to whom. We can only speculate that they said it's supposed to go to the frontline workers, but I guess we're going to see. Until then, Gershon, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.